Hey guys, welcome to the Kane Audio Vlog. I'm Dom Kane. It is Friday, so it's time for another Ask Me Anything. Grab yourself a cup of coffee, have a sit down, relax, we'll go through some shit. Before I get started, house admin, what have I been doing this week? Oh, so yeah, update on the, well, actually before I update on that, update on the studio. There isn't an update. I'm still in the temporary space. I need to get my act together. Christmas is coming quickly. Yeah, I don't think there's an update on that. No, it's just bits and pieces. I've spent most of this week fiddling around with a Hackintosh, which some of you will be pleased to know. So I've got, in fact there might be slightly different background noise to usual here today, because I've currently got my PC that, for long-time followers will remember, I had a PC for doing sound design for VR games and stuff like that. So I had the Oculus Rift, and used obviously PC for that to do to test it and blah blah blah. Yeah, I have now taken the hard drive out of that. I had a couple of spare hard drives lying around, so I literally just took out the Windows hard drive, stuck in a blank hard drive, and thought, did a quick checklist of hardware compatibility for Hackintoshes, and realised, because I'm on Intel i5 processors and NVIDIA GTX graphics card on there, I thought actually that kind of ticks the boxes for a Hackintosh. So before I try and upgrade my Mac Pro, which is this side of me, I thought I'd at least give it a go and see how tricky the Hackintosh thing is. It turns out that it took a while to get my head around the basic install, but once I'd got that far in, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. My biggest issue was getting the thing booted, because you have to boot off a USB drive first, and then getting it to boot on its own accord was a bit tricky. Turned out, if anyone has issues with that, it turned out for me, all I had to do was go into BIOS and just reset to default values, even though I'm pretty sure they were already default. But yeah, I reset to default values on BIOS and it seemed to boot. So this screen right here is now a PC running OS X, and if I bring up About This Mac, you can see it is a 3.29 GHz Intel Core i5 with 8 GB of RAM, because I took a couple of dodgy sticks of RAM out, and NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060, blah de blah de blah. So yeah, so that's running. It's running on High Sierra, and it's running fairly stable. There's a couple of things that don't work, like iMessages and FaceTime, but to be honest, every Mac I've ever owned, I switch that shit straight off anyway, because I don't want to make to phone me up and for my computer to start ringing. So that doesn't bother me. I've got my Audient running, that's all fine. I downloaded Bitwig, I downloaded Final Cut Pro to test that. That runs a lot faster than it did on my Mac Tower, and the reason for that, so we now have proof that Apple stopped supporting Final Cut Pro on El Capitan and continue to supporting it in future versions, and that's why my Mac Tower, even though it still runs solidly, which annoys me, Apple decided to throttle Final Cut Pro, which made me move to DaVinci Resolve, and to be honest, I'm going to carry on using that because it's far more superior. So screw Apple. Yeah, so that's all up and running, which basically means it's not an ideal machine. I'm not going to use it as my main machine. I'm literally just testing it. I need to see how easy or difficult it is to update OSs and stuff like that as well. So I'm just fiddling with it in the background. So right now I've got it running and it's working, which is a good sign. So potentially, instead of spending what, £8 on a iMac Pro, I can build an equivalent machine for about £2 if that. So yeah, so that's looking good. On with this week's AMA. Now I've waffled for 5 minutes already. Yeah, I'm just going to start. I'm going to start at the bottom this time. Why not? Rod Marconi, smart, high five. St. Nicholas, smart. Oh man, the keyword for spying devices. Yeah, possibly. High five. Zombo, how long should a music producer work in a day? I make music for about 3 to 4 hours. That's a good question. I don't know if there is an amount that you should or shouldn't work, but from my experience, I used to work on music related stuff pretty much from the moment I woke up, which was say 8-9 o'clock in the morning, until pretty much until I went to bed, which is 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't think that was very healthy. I don't think I'm ever going to pretend I've ever been healthy. And actually a lot of my days then were kind of spent procrastinating, really, and a lot of my days now are spent procrastinating building Hackintoshes and stuff. But I've cut down my hours considerably over the last 5 years. Again, for long time followers, you'll remember I've talked about, I think it was even last week's video, I talked about a period where I just wanted to focus on sound design and setting up the studio and whatever, and less production as an artist. And at that point I tried cutting down my hours to, I'll say, 8 AM to 6 PM ish, which is kind of what I did, and kind of 5 days a week. I try and give myself a weekend, and I kind of still stick to that. I start at probably 8 or 9 in the morning, and I finish at probably 5, 6 or 7 in the evening. And I think it takes a lot of discipline to be able to switch off your email. And if I get an email from a big label or whatever at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, you know, I still sometimes struggle to not reply to that straight away. But I do try and leave it to the next day, because nothing's that important for you to not have a life. So as for your question, how long should a producer work in the day? I guess it depends on how much time you can afford. For me, I think if you're self-employed as a music producer, I think you need to be careful that you get the balance right. You know, we all dream of being self-employed and self-sufficient, but there needs to be a balance. You need to be able to have a life as well, even if that's doing cheap or free stuff, watching TV or whatever. You know, you still need to find time for yourself and have a couple of hobbies and enjoy life and have friends and family and relationships and whatever. So if you've got a full-time job and music production is your sort of side piece, then I would say 3 or 4 hours a day is more than enough, really. Yeah, you know, I wouldn't. It's tricky because, you know, what I'll do sometimes is I'll wake up at whatever time and I'll start working, and I'll plough through some stuff that has deadlines or emails need replying to or whatever, and then I'll end up writing a track. And sometimes I'll find myself just kind of dipping in and out of YouTube or Facebook or whatever. Hey, there's a good chance that most of you watching this video right now are probably supposed to be doing some work. You know, it's what we do. And I think during those times, I think you have to, while you need a bit of discipline, you also need to be able to recognize that right now I'm not feeling inspired, I'm not feeling creative. So there's no point pushing yourself, especially if you don't have deadlines looming. There's really no point in trying to force yourself to be creative. In fact, one of my first years of being self-employed many years ago, I think it was probably the first year, and it was getting close to Christmas, and I had a fair amount of gigs on, but they were low paying, and I was doing a fair bit of production, but there wasn't enough money coming in. Christmas was looming, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'll get a temp job. It was quite a good one actually, in a bookshop. Really enjoyed that. And because obviously they were looking for Christmas staff, so I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I think I did like 2 days a week or something like that. and I found that quite frustrating because while I was earning money and that's great, and I needed to do it because I needed the money for Christmas, and so I'm glad I did it. I think it was also frustrating because you can't choose when to be creative, and I think that's the hardest part about being a full-time music producer, is if you set yourself rigid schedules of, say, I will work Monday to Friday 9 to 5. Well, what if at 4 p.m. on a Thursday you suddenly start building this awesome track and you're just totally in the zone and everything's going, and then at 5 o'clock, beep beep, right, I've got to go. Well, that's probably not the best way to work, because the following morning you might come back in and you've kind of lost that creative flow. The opposite can be true if you're working a temp job, or for any of you that have full-time jobs. I feel for you, because if you want music to be your thing, it's very difficult to find that balance, because you know, if you're working a full-time job 9 to 5, by the time you get home you have something to eat, you catch up with the news, friends, whatever it is you do in life, you know, it can be quickly 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening and you're tired. You know, you maybe not feeling super creative or inspired or whatever. So for those moments you kind of have to just go, you know what, I'll give it a rest today. And so if you don't spend 3 or 4 hours, it's not an issue. I think it's, you know, people talk about certainly in sports you need to spend, I think it's 10,000 hours to perfect or to master an art of whatever form. You just have to give yourself realistic expectations that, let's go with, I know that 10,000 hours thing is a bit of a nothing really, but you know, let's assume that was true. And if that's the case, and if you're working a full-time job and whatever, then you just got to expect that that 10,000 hours is going to take a bit longer. It's going to take, you know, an extra few years or whatever to get into that position where you feel you've mastered whatever it is you're doing. So yeah, that's probably a long-winded way of answering a really easy question. Deadly Custard, smart, high five. Another great AMA. It's interesting to hear about DJing or performing. I've noticed that most music marketing emails I get are promoting vinyl. Are people still DJing with them, or are they for the artisan brogues with no socks brigade only? Another good question. I struggle with that. I have to admit, I struggle with the whole vinyl thing, because I come from a time where vinyl was pretty much your only option for DJing, and it was shit. As a DJ, dragging heavy boxes and bags and trolleys of vinyl, my first, you know, bunch of international gigs, I can remember I had the UDG trolley bag and then a metal flight case. So the flight case was to check in, the UDG bag was carry on, each one weighing, I don't know, 20 odd kilos plus. And then, you know, quite often a shoulder bag on top, because that had headphones, clothes, whatever it was I needed. You know, lugging these round an airport, you get into Heathrow at 4 o'clock in the morning, you're not even awake properly, and you're dragging these super heavy bags around. You know, the flight case didn't have wheels on it. I'm sure I could have got one with wheels had I thought about it, but it was just back breaking. So by the time you landed in this other country ready for a gig, you know, you're knackered already, your back's killing you, your shoulders are dead. So just on logistics alone, vinyl was a bit of a nightmare. Then it comes to playing it in clubs, and I remember the amount of gigs I went to where, you know, the DJ booth, most of them in fairness were like concrete tables, so they didn't vibrate, but some of them, you know, it only took some guy behind you, if you were playing a big hall or whatever, you know, there'd be some guy like your agent or whatever behind you, and you reach a drop in a track and they start jumping up and down and the floor's bouncing and the needles start skipping. So again, the physicality of it was a bit of a nightmare. So that's that. Now we get on to sound quality. And the truth is, having sat in on a lot of mastering engineers for back in the day when my tracks were coming out on vinyl, there were issues with things like, I remember one track I had a slight bit of chorus on a snare drop every 8 bars or so, and the needle kept cutting through the dub plate, the test pressing for the vinyl. It kept cutting through every time, and I eventually had to completely get rid of that snare, which was one of the main features of that track, or I wanted it to be. And in the end we just had to get rid of it because the stereo balance of the needle just couldn't cope on mastering it to vinyl. So there were all sorts of issues with things like that. Then we get on to the fact that vinyl cannot reproduce very, very low sub bass very well, and it cannot reproduce particularly high frequencies very well. It's really only good in the mid-range, and people talk about vinyl sounding warm. That's what they mean, is you've basically stuck a low pass filter on, a high pass filter on, or let's call it a band pass filter, and you've chopped off the high end and the low end, and everything sounds a bit muddy. That's what people are saying is warm in vinyl. To me, that's not warm, that's muffled. And also then on the sound quality, you've got to think that 99.9% of music producers, like myself, are using computers, DACs and monitor speakers, and we're listening and we're producing. That's what we're producing it to. So that's how I want my music to sound. When I make a track, I'm making it on my equipment, and I get it how I want it to sound. If somebody then presses one of my current tracks to vinyl, that's not how I made it. That's not what I wanted it to sound like. I didn't spend hours and hours crafting that little tweak of a sound for it to then come out muffled and distorted on vinyl. So as much as I probably feel like I'm coming across as slagging off vinyl, and I kind of am, I can understand that there are some purists out there with ridiculously expensive turntables and cartridges and needles and maybe a tube valve amp and immaculate floor standing speakers that are high fidelity, and maybe playing vinyl on something like that sounds lovely, and I'm sure that it probably does, because where vinyl maybe lacks the high end or the depth in the low end, using something like a valve amp will add some harmonic value and harmonic content to the sound that maybe compensates for that bit that vinyl itself was maybe missing. So I'm not saying there is no room for vinyl in this day and age, but I do think that maybe, as you mentioned, the Artisan Brogues with No Socks Brigade, for me personally, I think that's for them to enjoy. If one of my releases came out on vinyl now, that's cool. I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to push for that. You know, I know Mau5trap have done a few vinyl releases. My track didn't get selected on whatever it was, the 2017 something or other recap thing. None of my tracks got selected for that. I'm okay with that. I didn't feel that I missed out on anything, because I feel like we're past the age of vinyl. The one thing I will say that maybe is important for a lot of people to understand as well is the profit margins of vinyl are far better than the profit margins of MP3, because vinyl, when I was buying it, I don't know what the prices are now, probably even more, but when I was buying vinyl, you're looking at minimum £5 for each record, and there was one track on that record that you'd use, so you're paying £5, or let's call it, again back then it would have been $7 or $8 for one track. Well, now you go on Beatport and it's what, 99 cents for a track. So the profit margins are very different. And again, back then, you know, when vinyl was your only option, you could press 10,000 copies, I guess, and that was kind of your first run. So you'd pretty much expect to sell 10,000. Nowadays, I'm sure it's entirely different. You probably wouldn't sell 10,000 vinyl unless you're really doing something right. but the profit margin on that is going to be substantial as well. So I think there's two reasons that vinyl is gaining popularity at the moment. One of them is the hipster appeal, you know, the fact that everybody wants to be different by being exactly the same as everyone else who wants to be different. And then the second angle on that is the record labels, distributors, whatever, you know, their profit margins a lot more friendly there. So yeah, that's my view on vinyl. Deadmouse5, the Mexican Deadmouse. Hey Dom, thanks for this week's AMA. My questions are, how do you usually start your day? Do you have a schedule or some habits? So I kind of touched on that earlier, I think, but I wake up at probably 7:30, mostly for family reasons, and I get to work pretty much as soon as I'm dressed and ready and whatever. My first thing I do, other than having a coffee, is my email inbox. That's generally the first thing I do, because my inbox I treat as my to-do list. My goal in life is to have an empty inbox. I will reply to things as they come in, but obviously each time I reply and send a new file or whatever, I'm going to get another reply back. So that's kind of my aim, is to have an empty inbox. It's never happened so far in 20 odd years, but who knows, one day. So yeah, so I kind of start with emails, and I don't really have much of a set plan from then. I've tried splitting up my work sometimes, where I thought, right, maybe I should say Mondays is for my own productions, Tuesdays is for mixdowns, Wednesdays is for sound design or something. And I love the idea of being able to do that, but it never really works out, because if Monday is my day for productions, maybe I'm just not feeling creative that day. So what I could actually do is just get some admin or do my taxes or whatever. And then there will be days where maybe I've got a mixdown day, but actually I've already done the mixdowns for that week. So yeah, so I don't really have a strict schedule, but like I say, I sort of approximately start work at 8 or 9, and then I approximately finish work at 6 or 7, and I approximately work 5 or 6 days a week. I try and give myself a weekend off, but sometimes that can be split up into 2 different days at random points in the week, or sometimes, you know, it depends on how much work I've got on and where I'm at with all of that. How do you arrange your time on PC and time that you spend with friends and family? I think I've probably just answered that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I kind of take each day as it comes. I kind of have, you know, being self-employed, on a Sunday night, for example, when I go to bed, I'll kind of think to myself, right, this week I need to do this, this and this, and I'll have a rough idea of, you know, and usually a lot of my sound design projects take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks to finish, so it's an ongoing thing, and maybe by the 4th or 5th week of a sound design project I'll have already got another 1 or 2 projects come in that I've then scheduled for, say, next month or something. So I've generally always got something ongoing. So for example, right now I've just started a new project which will be a loops pack for house drums, and the aim of that I've discussed with the loops company is to have quite a varied range of house drums, so it's not specific to, say, tech house or pop house or deep house or whatever. It's kind of everything in between. You know, that's going to take me, on top of the rest of my work, like other sound design jobs or mixdowns or whatever, or my own productions, that's going to take me, you know, 4 or 5 weeks or so to get done. So I'll generally dedicate maybe 2 or 3 days a week to doing that. And yeah, and I just kind of make everything else fit around. So then when it comes to friends and family stuff, again, you know, if a friend phones me up and says, hey, there's this gig going on, I'll give you an example. In fact, Monster Get Down got in touch saying, hey, I'm playing in Manchester next month, which is now this month, at Warehouse Project, do you want to come? So again, I can go, right, 17th November, Manchester Warehouse Project, I'm going there. So on the 14th, 15th, 16th, I'll have scheduled my work to go around it, really. So yeah, I think it's difficult to explain, but that's how I do it. How did you make the kick from your structures track? So I did a tutorial on how I made that track from start to finish on sonicacademy.com. Check it out there. As for the kick, I used Sonic Academy Kick 2, which I love. In fact, they've just beated a new version, I think it's 1.1 or 1.2 or something, which I haven't looked at yet, but I'm a big fan of Kick 2. It's a great VST where you can choose your own clicks and transients and shape the amplitude, the pitch, the envelopes of everything. There's some compression in there, a limiter, some distortion, some harmonics. You can do everything in there. So yeah, I think they gave me that VST whenever they were betaing the first version, and I fell in love with it straight away. And all of my tracks, all of my kicks, I use Kick 2. I think it's very rare that I use a sample for kicks these days. I love it so much. Thank you very much. Or is the kick coming from a sample pack? No, I've just said that. So from which one is it? The last question is, do you write your chords by using your knowledge about music theory, or do you just go trial and error like Joel does? I would like to become admin moderator for the group. Oh, we'll get onto that. So music theory, I can see my camera is about to hit the 30-minute mark, so I will reset and answer that question now. Music theory, interestingly, I've spoken to a tutor not long ago for a very well-known music production school, and this was in a post that someone was asking about music theory, and I saw this person, didn't know they were a tutor for this very well-known music school that I won't name at this point, and I saw him saying something along the lines of, oh, you don't need music theory for dance music. In fact, I encourage people to not learn music theory because then it just complicates things. And I read that and thought, well, that's weird. Why would you encourage people not to learn music theory? So I replied saying that actually I didn't learn music theory at the beginning, although I knew very basic theory, and I still don't know very much. But the more I learned music theory, the more I was able to express what I wanted to express. And I think you can only really truly break the rules with confidence when you know the rules. And then he replied something along the lines of, oh, it's just not necessary, this, that and the other. And basically he was really just writing off music theory. And it then transpired that he was a music tutor in a very well-known school, which outraged me then, because I thought, hang on, you're supposed to be a teacher. You should want all students, all people, to embrace any new knowledge in any field. That's, you shouldn't, how can you possibly call yourself a teacher of people when you're telling them to not to bother to learn something that is clearly proven to be valuable knowledge? So in terms of do I write my chords using my knowledge? Yes and no. So and I think I shouldn't speak on behalf of Joel because I don't really know his production, his music theory knowledge or his production technique, but to my understanding he must have a good grounding in music theory. I to my understanding, he plays by ear, and as do I. But you know, he probably understands the difference between a minor chord and a major chord, or throwing C major in a D minor scale or something like that, because he does it a lot. And some of the chord progressions he creates are really, really intricate, and I think you need to understand the basics of how chords fit or don't fit in some scales, and they do fit in others, and the difference in various intervals. So I think learning basic intervals, learning basic scales, learning a few basic major and minor chords within those scales, and I guess learning what the tonic or root note is in a particular chord compared to a scale, and recognizing that interval. Those things are I think, I won't say they're essential, because clearly lots of people manage without, but I think they're really helpful. So I've spent the last, I don't know how many years, trying to slowly teach myself some music theory. I don't claim to be in any way, shape or form an expert, but a lot of my chord phrases come from me experimenting with those things. So you'll notice for the last 2 years most of my tracks have been in D minor, because that's a scale I've learnt to play with, and I'm teaching myself the chords within that scale, what should and shouldn't work. And in fact, I've just done a track that will hopefully get to Mau5trap soon, where the last note or phrase, the last chord of the phrase, is not in scale. It's in D. The phrase is in D minor, but I'm throwing a C major in there, and the reason for that is because I want to hold tension. And again, in music theory, you learn that if you've got, say, a four chord phrase where each chord is for one bar, let's say, so on bar 4 you have what's called a resolve, so it resolves to the tonic. So if you're in D minor, your root note is D, because you're in a D minor scale, and so that means your first note is D, and you should always resolve to, which is again, I could even be wrong with some of this, but to my understanding, you resolve by going to a particular interval from D, so that when you hit the loop point and you come back to D again, it sounds comfortable to the human ear, because that's what we're used to hearing as humans. So I think understanding things like that in music theory are really important as a music producer, especially if you want to create interesting chord phrases. So this track I've done, for example, oh, in fact, there's I've put a little snippet of the chord phrase on my SoundCloud, so check that out. It's called Stoic, and if you listen to the fourth, I'll say the last chord of the phrase, where it starts again and then repeats, you'll notice there I've got, I think, 3 or 4 instruments playing slightly different variations of the same chord, and there's a crossfade from, you'll notice at the very beginning of the track, it's like a clean saw wave type sound, almost organ sounding, and then I bring in the Moog and start playing chords underneath, and so the whole kind of structure of it is it changes over time. And what happens is, if you notice, I think the intro is like 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes long, and if you pay attention to the chords throughout that phrase, some chords are getting louder as others get quieter, and the newer chords hold more tension in the last chords of the phrase, so it actually builds tension musically, and that is something that I could never have done 3 years ago, because I didn't know enough music theory to get that from my head into Bitwig. So this is why I say, for me, music theory is really important. Obviously, you need to learn everything else first. If you want to be a dance music producer, you need to learn compressors, you need to learn basic sound design, you need to learn, you know, your workstation, Bitwig, Ableton, whatever. You need to learn the basics of getting drums to sound good and whatever. But once you've done that, you then really need to start, if you want to make something different and unique, you need to really push the music theory side. And that's where I feel a lot of people lack these days, is, you know, they go with generic pop chords, and sure, that's all good, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. If it works, it works. But if you want to do something that's a bit more creative and a bit more interesting, and for me, I don't want to keep churning out the same tracks. I'm not interested in doing that. I want my music to be slightly different. And when, for example, a lot of my tracks use similar sounds, then I need to think differently in the musicality of it. So again, I'm waffling on that one, but I develop my chords. A lot of it is trial and error, because I know roughly I'm in this scale and I'm going to roughly throw in these chords. So I'll sit there and I'll play some notes and chords inside that scale until I think, oh, that's good. And I don't know what those chords are because I don't know the names of them, but I know what notes I'm allowed and not allowed to press in that scale. And then sometimes, like with this track I've just been talking about, I might go, oh, I'll press B. And I know I'm not, you know, there's not supposed to be a B note in the D minor scale, but actually if I drop down a couple of intervals and hit B, then it lands on a really uncomfortable note, but actually I kind of like that, and then you can build your chords around that. So it's kind of trial and error, but with some basic music theory. Like I say, I'm not talking on behalf of Deadmau5 because I don't know his answer to that, but I'm thinking that's probably kind of along the same lines as what he does. I think he's got a fairly good grounding in music theory, probably way better than mine, to be honest. But from what I can hear, I think, you know, he does trial and error, but he kind of knows what should and shouldn't work, and that's how it is. I would like to become admin moderator for your group. Cool. Yeah, I've not done that with anyone yet, so I will keep you in mind. Cheers. Love your work and effort you put into this. Stay smart. High five. Cheers. Moving on. Outsider. Hey Dom, smart. High five. I was glad to hear you mention Stefan Bodzin. Badly regret not having seen the money to see him at Brixton Electric a couple of months back or so. Gutted. Yeah, I'd quite like to see him live, actually. I'm not sure if I want 2 hours solid of his music, and I hate to say that because a lot of it sounds very much the same. But having said that, you know what, just to stand there and watch what he does technically, I think I'd love that. I could probably sit there for 5 hours and listen, really. Yeah, he is a bit of a legend at the moment. However, if you do end up touring or doing shows nearby, by hook or by crook, I'll be there. Awesome, that would be good. Unless I'm still penniless, well, in which case I would sort you with guest list. Simple as that. I do have a sound design question regarding a song by Stefan Bodzin, but feel it's probably left for the group. Anyway, thanks for answering my question about Ryzen. No questions this week, but have a great weekend. By all means, if you want to ask on sound design about Stefan Bodzin, then feel free to ask. I might not know the answer, as I don't study his work or whatever. I just know that of the tracks I've heard of his, they've been brilliant. So yeah, that is something I'm definitely open to you asking on this channel. That's what this channel is for. And then finally, last question, Nathan Zaskarinskis. Smart Dom, high five. I've had to think about the whole DJ thing and still can't make my mind up between Ableton and Traktor. You put me off Ableton a bit with the whole setup story, but I do think there would be more creative options in Ableton, ? Okay, yeah, I didn't mean to put you off. That wasn't my intention. I think it's just something to consider. So, and the reason you should consider it is based on who you're audience is and what kind of venue you're in and all of that sort of stuff. You know, like I said last week, if you're playing to a Friday night cheesy club local bar, then maybe setting up Ableton and having all these awesome things maybe won't get acknowledged by the crowd, and it might feel a bit soul destroying. You know, you're spending ages setting up, you're rebooting your laptop because the audio interface didn't kick in or something stupid like that, and then you're getting a bit panicky and whatever. You know, it's different for different people. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to put you off that, because at the end of the day, you know, you could be, I don't know your music, but you could be the most amazing Ableton live performer, and it would be wrong of me to say don't do it, because you never, you know, I can only say what I felt when, I think I gave the example when I was in Pasha, London, playing Room 2. So the crowd weren't there for me because I was a Room 2 artist, and I just kind of felt it was a bit soul destroying spending so long setting up and setting down, and for all they knew, you know, let's be honest, with a Room 2 in a club like Pasha, most people are in Room 2 because they've just stumbled into it. They're not there because their favourite artist is there. They'd be in the main room for that. And I just kind of felt like it was a bit soul destroying, because I could have been checking email for all they knew, and I felt I was doing all these fancy nifty little things, and actually it just wasn't being recognised. And then I felt at the end of it, I saw, you know, some kid come up with a USB stick, plug in, headphones on, boom, away he goes, playing all the hits. And I sort of looked at that and thought, what's the difference? Why have I just spent all this time setting up all this stuff and doing this thing that I felt was really creative, when actually I could have just turned up and chucked in a USB stick, thrown on my headphones and played all the hits, and everyone would have been just as happy as they were. So I don't know, I guess that's something to bear in mind. So you say, I do think there would be more creative options in Ableton. So that's why I started, and maybe that's an important thing I should say as well. I started, like I've said earlier on in this video, I started with vinyl, CD became a thing, CDJs became a thing. I moved on to CDs because logistically, hey, what are you going to do? You're going to carry, would you rather carry 100 vinyl or 100 CDs? I know which one I'd rather drag through an airport. So I moved on to CD pretty quickly, and it was kind of half CD vinyl, then eventually full CD. And then it got to a point where Ableton had come out, and I was trialing a few bits and pieces and thought, hey, I'll give this a go. So I then started doing Ableton sets, and actually I found that once I'd got myself a MIDI controller and I had a bunch of effects to tweak, it was much more fun than DJing. And so I think maybe that's probably an important flip side to that argument that I've just said, is that, you know, when you're presented with 2 decks and a mixer, even the latest and greatest Pioneer mixers, they're quite limited as to what effects they've got. You know, they've got the phaser, delay, the reverb, beat, repeat, whatever. There's a fair bit to play with on there, but you need to know that specific mixer intimately to be able to really master it. And if you're traveling from one club to another club, they could have different mixers. You know, maybe one's got an Allen and Heath or whatever, and in which case you've just lost half your fun. So whereas if you've got your own laptop playing your own stuff with your own effects and your own everything built in, then you know where you are in every club, on every sound system, in every venue. You know what you've got to at your disposal, and so you can make it your set and make it way more fun. So I think that's probably an important thing to consider. So I guess you know, advice really is just play it by ear and see how you get on with, try both, you know, do half and half maybe, you know, and just find what do the crowd prefer, does it make a difference to the crowd, and what do you prefer. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with turning up with a laptop and a couple of USB sticks, and maybe if you've got a 2-hour set, do the first hour on USB, and then you can do that while you're setting up your laptop on the side as well, and then at some point take over on laptop and just leave your USB stick in, so if your laptop goes horribly wrong, you can just take over from USB where you left off. Yeah, maybe that should work. So, you know, much like I was just saying now I've said it out loud, it makes sense. But like I was saying, where, you know, when I transitioned from vinyl to CD, obviously some tracks weren't available on CD and some weren't available on vinyl, so you had half and half, and you'd mix between the two. So there's no reason why you couldn't do that between USB and laptop or Traktor or whatever. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could mix between the two if you wanted, Ableton and Traktor running on the same laptop. I bet there's some sort of bridge software to do that. If not, just you can probably do it by tapping and then plus minus the pitch bend or something. At the end of the day, they're both going to be digital software, so they're going to be rock solid on BPMs. So if you can mix CDs, you can mix between Ableton and Traktor. I don't know, give it a go, let me know. So, such as rearranging the track into or editing it prior to performing, although I guess the same could be done in Traktor if you exported the edit and mixed it in Traktor. Yeah, so you could bounce off stems individually. I've never used Traktor, I must admit, but I'm guessing you can have more than 2 channels at any given time. So you could print stems of, say, drums and bass, and then another stem of maybe your percussion and add-on drums, and then another stem of your melodies or whatever, and you have cue points set up. So then you're mixing, instead of between tracks, you're mixing between layers of tracks, I suppose. You could easily do that. Yeah, it just, like I say, it depends. Like, you know, a performance has to be performed by a performer, and at the same time has to be appreciated by a crowd, and that's the difficult bit, is getting that combination. You know, sometimes you see a DJ doing wild things on stage and the crowd aren't really that bothered, and in which case, is there any point in doing it? But then you'll see other times, you know, you might have a more intelligent crowd who are going, holy shit, this guy's doing some clever stuff, you know. So yeah, there we go. Sorry if it's a bit incoherent. It's 7:30 AM and I've just got in from work. Damn. Where I started at 8 PM. Double damn yesterday. Well, I hope you had a good night at work. That, my friends, yeah, is it for this week. It's been quite a long one. And it is actually Friday and it's almost 1 PM, so I better get cracking with the upload of this, and I'm going to do it on the Hackintosh today, so wish me luck. If this video actually comes out at, say, 3-4 PM on Friday, then you know I succeeded with the Hackintosh export, so yay, otherwise boo. Yeah, if you've made it this far into the video, then well done to you, because it's now, what, 50 minutes long or something. So to prove that you have made it this far in, I'm scanning around, I'm going to say the keyword this week is integral. So if you've made it this far into the video, comment the word integral to let me know. And that is it for this week. Thanks again for tuning in. Yes, usual rules apply. Please do like, comment, subscribe, share. Hit the little notification button on the subscribe as well, so you get notified when I upload new videos. And I'll see you again next week. Cheers.